Hi fellow bag makers. Today's tutorial, as promised, is the Swoon Ethel Tote. It's a really good beginner bag pattern. It's perfect if you just want to dip your toes in the bag making world and you're not sure whether you're going to enjoy bag making and you don't want to go out and spend a fortune on different hardwares. This is the perfect pattern for you. It doesn't take a lot of different things, basically fabric, interfacing and a little bit of foam. So it really is the perfect beginner bag pattern. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and let's get started. Going through the pattern pieces that you'll need for the Ethel Tote. So slip pockets you will need 4 of. So I've cut 3 out of my lining fabric and 1 out of my exterior fabric. All 3 of my lining pieces have been interfaced with a woven interfacing. My lining fabric, although I'm using a vinyl, it is a very lightweight vinyl it does have a little bit of stretch in it, so I have interfaced that with a lightweight woven interfacing. If you're using a vinyl for your bag, you won't need to interface it. If you're using a cotton or something that is quite lightweight, I would suggest interfacing it with a woven interfacing. You'll also need 4 main panels, 2 exterior and 2 lining pieces, all interfaced the same as before. Then your side panels, I have 2 lining pieces interfaced with woven interfacing, and then I have 2 exterior pieces. I have these in a contrast vinyl, so these aren't interfaced because this is a thicker vinyl. Your 2 handle pieces, again the measurements for these are given in the pattern. I'm also going to be doing an inside zipper pocket, so for that you will need 2 inside lining pieces. These measure 9 inches by 8 inches deep and have been interfaced with a woven interfacing. Then going to need a zipper facing. This has been interfaced with a non-woven interfacing, and this measures 9 inches wide by 2.5 inches deep. And then I have a number 3 zipper, which you can see is a little bit longer than my pieces. It probably measures about 11 inches wide, and I'll show you why I cut that a little bit longer when I actually show you how I insert the inside zipper pocket. Then you'll also need, cut out of foam, 2 main panels, 2 side panels and a bottom panel. And then lastly, the other things that I'm just going to be using is clips. I use these little hair clips as well sometimes, matching threads, which I'm just going to be using moon threads, and I am just going to be using some magnetic snaps to actually close my bag. These are just 18mm magnetic snaps. You could use 14mm, that would be fine, and I'll show you how to install those as well. So I'm going to start on my lining pieces first. I'm sewing on the Janome. I'm using a moon thread. I've got a 16 needle in as I'm sewing on cotton, and I think that's all I need to sort of go through before I start. If there's anything I've missed and you want to check, just ask in the comments and I'll come back and answer them later. So we'll start with your 2 slip pocket pieces, and we're going to sew these together, right sides together, with 1/4 inch seam allowance. I do all of my construction at 2.5 stitch length, and then I do all of my top stitching at 4.5. So if you see me switching between the two, And when I'm constructing, I'm doing 2.5, and when I'm top stitching, I'm doing 4.5. I'm just going to trim this back a little bit, just with my pink and shears, just so that it sits nicer. You can press this as well if you want to get a really nice crisp edge. And I always try to make sure that that seam sits in the middle. And then I top stitch this at 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to find my centre of this slip pocket. And that just means when I put it onto the main panel of the lining, I can get it to meet up nicely. I'm just going to find the centres of this main panel. Let's get my clips. And I'm just going to clip this round. So I've matched those centres, and then where I've folded that, I'm just making sure that those centre lines meet up, because I'm going to stitch up the centre here to create 2 pockets. So again, just using my top stitch length, I'm just going to baste the slip pocket to the lining. And then when I get to this centre, I'm going to stop and I'm going to come up. And I'm going to create that first pocket. So I'm just going to follow this crease mark. You might not be able to see it very well on the video, but I can see that line. If you were using a fabric where you couldn't see that line very well, you know, you could mark it with chalk or with a heat erasing pen. And then I'm just going to come down that's just created a double row of stitching, so that gives this pocket extra strength. And I've done a couple of back stitches at the top of this pocket, again just to give extra strength to the pockets as you're putting your hands in and out, you know, putting phones, purses, anything like that in and out the pocket. It just creates a little bit extra strength and stops the stitching coming away. So that's the first side of one of my lining pieces done, and I'm going to move on to the other side of my lining piece and insert a zipper pocket. So moving on to the other side of your lining piece, obviously if you're following the pattern to the letter, then you would skip this part and just move on to assembling the lining. But if you want to put a zipper pocket inside your bag, this is how you would do it, and this is how you would insert a zipper pocket into any bag that didn't have it within the pattern. So for the purposes of this bag, I'm installing a 7-inch zipper. So my zipper facing is going to be 9 inches wide. So I create the box to create the opening for the zipper by marking 1 inch in from the edge, 1 inch in from the edge, and then the same at the top and the same at the bottom. And because my zipper facing measures 2.5 inches down, that leaves me with 1/2 inch gap. So because my zipper facing is 9 inches wide, that leaves me with 7 inches in the middle. So if you wanted an 8-inch zipper pocket, you would make your zipper facing 10 inches. So if you were doing a bigger bag, that's how you would create a bigger zipper pocket, and you would cut your lining pieces to correspond to that. I basically cut my lining pieces the same as my facing, and that's just basically how I personally do it. Other people may do it differently. This is just how I do it. So my zipper pocket facing would then go right sides together onto the lining piece of the bag. So in this case I'm doing the Ethel Tote, but this would work no matter what bag you were doing. So I have marked my centers of my lining piece, but I just create a crease within the pattern piece itself and create a line, and then I do the same within the zipper facing, and I then mark roughly 1 inch down and line up my pieces. So I make sure that those lines meet, so it's horizontal and straight this way, because those lines meet all of the way down. And because it's 1 inch from the top, it basically means that my zipper is going to be roughly 2 inches from the top of my bag. And most patterns are 1/2 to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So when you take that seam allowance into account, it's still a good distance from the top of the bag, that it's not going to be too close to the top, but it's not going to be too far down either. So that's just personally what I've found is a good measurement for inserting a zipper pocket if you don't have guidance to go by from a pattern. So I'm just going to pop a couple of pins into this zipper facing. So my zipper facing has been interfaced with a non-woven interfacing. Now I use non-woven because I find it gives a crisper line when it's turned through and pressed. But again, it's personal preference. This is just what I find. So I'm going to sew around this box. So again, just to sort of go over how I create this box, is I determine the size of the opening that I want. So in this case I wanted 7 inches. So I cut my zipper facing 9 inches wide by 2.5 inches deep. So I marked in 1 inch from each edge, which gives me a 7 inch by 1/2 inch box. If you wanted an 8 inch opening, you would do a 10 inch zipper facing. If you wanted a 9 inch opening, you would do an 11 inch zipper opening. But if you always do 2.5 inches depth, you'll always come out with a 1/2 inch gap, like a 1/2 inch opening for your zipper. So I hope that makes sense. Sometimes things do make sense in my head, but I don't always explain it properly. So I'm just going to sew around this box, and I'm going to do that at 2.5 inch stitch length. Now just before I get to the edge, I'm going to drop my stitch length to a 2. We just trim those threads back. Obviously we back stitch when we start and stop stitching, and then we're just going to cut through the centre of this opening. So I'm just going to find my pen so I can explain to you where I'm going to cut. So I'm going to cut along the centre, and I'm going to start and I'm going to stop about 1/2 inch, don't know if you can see that, from the ends of that box, and then I'm going to cut into the corners, and I'm going to cut right up to that stitching but not through the stitching, so that the edges or those corners are as crisp as I can possibly get them. So I use my big scissors to cut along the middle, and then I use my snips to cut up to the stitching in the corner, but like I say, I get as close to it but not cutting through that stitching. If you turn it through and you find that you need to be a little bit closer, you can always come back and, you know, snip again and get a little bit closer. So then all you need to do is pull this facing through, and take that to the ironing board and give that a press. If you haven't got close enough to the edges, it will sort of pucker. So if you find that it's puckering, just go back in, and I can see there that I haven't got quite close enough, so I'm just going to give that another little snip. That one's fine. Tiny touch there, and that one's fine. So I'm going to take that now to the ironing board and give that a press, and then I'll come back and show you the next steps. So that's all been pressed now. As you can see, my edges are all pretty flat and straight. So I'm going to move on to the lining pieces. So my lining pieces have been cut at 9 inches by 8 inches deep, and again this has been pretty much determined by the size of the pocket opening that I wanted, also by the depth of the bag that I'm putting this pocket into. So obviously again you can change these dimensions based on the size of the bag that you're putting your pocket into. If it was a bigger bag, you know, you can make a bigger zipper pocket. So your zipper, I always cut my zipper slightly bigger than the pieces, and that's because it then means that I can keep my zipper out of the way, and I can keep the zip nice and flat. So I'm going to attach the zip facing up over. Now again, this goes kind of against how you would normally attach a zip. Obviously normally you would attach a zip facing down and then press it the other way, but this way you want your lining piece facing up and you want your zip also facing up. So I've got my zip out of the way. If you want to make sure that you're not going to pull your zip off accidentally, you can pop a little clip on it just to keep it secure. If you want to use a little bit of double-sided tape to keep your zip in place while you work, you can. So I'm just going to use a basting length and just at around about 1/8 of an inch, I'm just going to baste this zip in place. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. So right sides together. And then it means when you open your zip pocket, you don't have any raw edges of your zip, and it's all nice and neat. So what I'm going to go and do is just take this over to the iron, and I'm just going to press this open so it's nice and easy to attach it into the lining piece. So that's our zip now pressed. And as you can see, it's lying much flatter, so it is going to be much easier to insert it into the lining. So I'm going to use a little bit of double-sided tape to just help keep it in place as I'm attaching it. Then I'm attaching it right at the very bottom because I'm actually going to be stitching a little bit further up, so it's not going to be, my needle's not going to be going through it and getting caught up. So you want to be making sure as much as you can that your zip is in the middle and it's nice and straight. And I just try to line up the edges of the facing with the edges of the lining pieces as much as I can. So just kind of adjust it until you get it as even as you possibly can. Now you'll notice that I've still got my zipper out of the actual opening at the moment. Now that's fine because I'm going to move it once I actually start stitching. So I'm going to start just down in this bottom corner here. And I'm just going to sew all the way around. And then when I get to about here, which is about 3/4 of an inch away from this edge, I'm just going to move the zipper pull through and then complete the stitching. You might have noticed me sort of doing back stitching there at my corners. The reason being is just I've found that my Janori is really being very temperamental at the moment with corners, so I find I have to do a back stitch, otherwise I get a slanted corner. So that's the only reason that I have done that. That's not something that you necessarily have to do. So I can now take that off. So we now have the zip installed, and it's just a case of sewing up the side seams. So one of your pieces is going to be longer than the other because this is kind of the width of your zip. So you can neaten it off if you want at this stage. And then we're just going to sew down each side to close off the zipper pocket. I am going to be leaving the bottom open because I'm going to be turning the bag through the opening in the zipper pocket. But if you weren't wanting to do that, all you would do is literally stitch down the side, along the bottom and up the other side to totally enclose your zipper pocket, and that would be the internal zipper pocket completely done. But like I say, I am actually going to leave an opening at the bottom of this pocket because that's actually how I'm partly going to turn the bag through. I am going to back stitch over my zip and I'm going to do a little turn at the bottom. This is just to help give a nice seam when I've turned the bag through and I come to close the seam up. I just find that it helps to give a nice finish. And then I just do the same on the other side. So I start with turning it up a little bit. And just back stitching over my zip. Can cut the excess of my zip off. Because I've trimmed my zip, what I'm going to do is just re-seal the edges of my zip. This side has already been done when I actually put the zipper pull on, but that's just to help stop the zip fraying. And then I'm just going to trim the corner here, and that's just to help take away the excess so that when this is turned through it's nice and neat. So that's your zipper pocket installed in one piece of your zipper lining, and that's the bottom left open to help turn the bag through. But like I say, if you didn't want to leave that through, you would just stitch all the way around and that would be the zipper pocket fully enclosed. So carrying on with our lining, we're going to move on to the bottom and the side panels. So to do that, we match up the short side of one of the side panels to the short side of the bottom panel, and we stitch together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we do exactly the same on the opposite side. make it nice and neat, I'm going to open up these seams and I'm just going to top stitch down each side so that seam is nice and flat. And I'm doing that at my top stitch and stitch length at 4.5. So that just makes those seams look a little bit neater and lay flatter. So then to put our lining pieces together, we find the centres of our entire gusset piece and we match the centre of our gusset piece to the centre of one of our lining pieces. And then just clip. I tend to clip this straight bottom piece together and then I come to the side and match the top and clip there. And then in order to get this piece here to match in with this flat piece, where it starts to curve, we just need to make some little snips into the gusset piece. And it should just, might need just to play around with it a little bit. And then we do the same on the other side. So match the top. And the secret when you're putting a gusset piece like this in is just lots and lots of clips. Like, you can't use too many clips. If you think, does it need another clip? Just put another clip in. Because the more clips that you've got to keep it clipped together and keep it so secure as you're sewing it, the easier it will be, and you know, the better sort of finish that you'll get, and you won't get sort of any like nicks and little pleats, and it'll be a much sort of nicer finish. So just go around and just check that that's sitting nicely. If you need to adjust, you know, now's the time to do it. If you need to space it out more, And then you can just double check that it's all sitting okay and you're happy with it before you start sewing it. So with the lining, you want your lining to be ever so slightly smaller than your exterior. So when we sew our exterior, we're going to be predominantly sewing that at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So when we sew our lining together, we are going to start it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top. So I'm going to line that up with my 1/2 inch marking on my foot plate, and I'm going to sew 1/2 inch for about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and then I'm going to grade that out to 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to sew the seam of the lining piece at 3/4 of an inch to make sure that my lining pieces, so my lining entire piece is smaller than my exterior. And I'm just going to do a few little back stitches over where the gusset goes over this slip pocket, again just to try and give it a little bit extra strength. And when I'm sewing anything with a gusset, I always sew it with the gusset facing up over. I know some people do it the opposite way. This is just something personal for me, but I like to sew it with the flat piece on the flat of my table, and the piece that is, or you know, could sort of crease and needs to be manipulated on the top, so that I can manipulate it if I need to. Again, that's just something that's just personal preference, but something that I just find works for me. So when I get to these bits here that where, you know, I've clipped in and I'm manipulating it to, you know, the round bit into the flat bit, I'm just flattening it out, trying to make sure that I don't have, you know, any nicks or tucks. And if I am lifting my foot to sort of flatten anything out, I make sure my needle is down so that my stitching, you know, doesn't go too wonky. I never ever get perfect stitching. And then as I come back up again to this side, when I come over the part where my slip pocket is, I'm just back stitching a couple of times, and then I'm going to start to come back up to the 1/2 inch, because obviously we need these top seams to match the top seams of the exterior, but we want the actual body of the interior to be slightly smaller than the body of the exterior. So we're just going to match up the other lining piece exactly the same way. So I'm going to match the centres that I've already marked, and I'm going to clip those straight pieces together. And I'm just going to do the same on the other side. Sometimes find that when you're putting a gusset in, you know, one side will go in much easier than the other. So if you find that one side has a little bit more excess in it than the other, just sort of move it round. You might have been just ever so slightly off when marking your centres. It does happen, but you know, if you've got a little tiny bit more excess in this side than this side, just, you know, sort of gently just move it along through your clips and even it up, and it'll work out absolutely fine. So again, doing exactly the same thing as we did on the other side, starting at a 1/2 inch, just for around about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and then moving up to 3/4 inch. And I've got the flat piece on the underside of the pieces, and I've got the gusset piece on the top part. And just go nice and slowly around this part where you've got all this material that you need to manipulate. And on this piece, where I come round to these two seams where the side piece of the gusset and the bottom piece met, I'm just going to stop and I'm going to back stitch here, and I'm going to stop and I'm going to leave this piece open, and I'm going to start again at the 3/4 inch. So I'm starting just on that side of the bottom panel of this seam, by maybe 1/4 inch. And again, I'm just going to back stitch, and then I'm going to start my seam again, taking it slowly round where this gusset is. Start to come back up to my 1/2 inch seam. So this is our lining done. I'm just going to quickly pull it through, because I'm just going to double check that I haven't got any major tucks or pleats. I've got a couple of little tiny ones, but you know, I can kind of live with them. So what I'm going to do now is turn back through, and I'm just going to trim these seams down that I've just sewn. So I'm going to trim down the complete seam first that I sewn. So I'm going to leave a little bit of this very top seam. I'm not going to trim that down. So I'm going to start about 1 inch, and I'm just going to trim it down by about half. And I'm going to use my pinking shears because a lot of this is on the curve. and obviously just making sure that I'm not cutting into the body of my line, and that I am just cutting through the actual seam allowance. And again, leaving this top seam as it is, and then this seam where we've left this bottom bit open, because I'm actually going to turn the bag through this bottom seam, but I've left the pocket open because I'm going to close this seam through the pocket, but I'll show you how to do that obviously more towards the end. But I'm still going to trim this seam down, so obviously not trimming right from here, so we'll trim from this side, leaving this top part and just trimming around this corner, but leaving this full seam allowance here where we've left it open, because we will trim it once we've closed it up, once the bag's been turned through. So that's the lining of our bag done. If you want to get a really nice finish on the inside of your bag, what you can do, if you've got a tailor's ham, is you can press these seams open, pop your tailor's ham in and give these seams a press, especially where they're on the round here. It will give your bag a better finish, a more professional finish. Any of these little tucks that you look quite sort of defined at the moment will look better being given a little bit of a press. But that's the lining finished, so we'll move on to the exterior of the bag. So I'm going to start with the handles because I've just put a new bobbin in. So I've already done one, so I'm going to take you through how the other one goes together. So it's going to create a 1-inch handle, so your piece is 4 inches wide, so mark a line down the centre. I've put 2 pieces of double-sided tape down the middle, and literally just going to fold in to just before that centre line, just so just on that centre line. And then do the same on the other side. I try to leave the tiniest little gap because I just find that it makes, when you turn it over again on itself, that it's not too bulky and it works quite well. And then just fold it over again, and then we're just going to sew down each side at 1/8 of an inch and 4.5 stitch length top stitching. If you want to clip it together as you go, that's absolutely fine. Make sure your needle's always in the down position if you're adjusting, to make sure that your edges are lining up. Sorry about that, the battery ran out. Right. So there is the other handle done. So you can put them to one side. I always try and do my handles, particularly if it's a crossbody strap, when I've just put a new bobbin in, and then you know you're not going to run out of bobbin when you're doing your top stitching part. So just like when we were doing the lining, we're going to start with our slip pocket. So right sides together, and 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just doing the same, trimming this down just with my pinking shears, with it being a curved edge. And then just top stitch along at 1/8 inch. I'm just using my fingers just to sort of finger press this. And again, I'm just trying to make sure that that seam is sitting in the middle and it isn't rolling more one way than the other. Going to find my centre of this piece and then find the centre of my main panel piece. So on this piece I'm going to deviate from the pattern ever so slightly. So if you wanted to separate the pocket into 2 pockets, you would just do exactly like I did in the lining piece. So as you based round, you would just stitch down the centre and separate this into 2 different pockets. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this as 1 pocket, but I'm going to attach a snap to keep this closed, so obviously to keep it more secure, and that way you know it's big enough for a phone or a small tablet or a diary, that sort of thing, on the front. So I'm going to get one of my snaps. I've got 2 because I'm going to use a snap to close the main body of the bag as well. And I'll show you the measurements that I would use personally to close this. So I've marked by sort of folding it in half where my centre is, and I'm going to mark down 1 inch from the top. So because I'm using an 18mm snap, it's sort of quite big, so I find 1 inch from the top is a good measurement. If you were using a 14mm snap, which would work perfectly well, I would maybe use a measurement of about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to mark through my prongs. And I'm just going to carefully cut through the lining. Now, in order to give this a bit extra security, I'm going to use a bit of decorative light on the back as well. So I'm just going to do exactly the same. And on this part, I'm going to put the female part of the magnetic snap. So I'm just going to use a little bit of fabric glue. I just find that this helps keep any sort of hardware that you install a little bit more secure. Again, it's just personal preference for me. It's not something that you have to do. And then I'm just going to use a little bit of tape on the back just to stop those prongs from damaging the fabric behind. So that's the first part installed. So find where I want to put the other part is I'm going to just line up this piece. My lining piece is a little bit off there, but that's fine because it'll get trimmed off as long as my exteriors meet up and match. That's fine. So I'm just going to clip that at the bottom just to keep it in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark with my pen on that part of the magnetic snap and then just push it on, and where it's transferred, that's where I know I need to install the other part. So I can quite easily now install the other part of the magnetic snap in exactly the same way. Just really carefully cutting through. I'm going to use a little bit of decorative light in the same way. those on together, and then we just baste this round all in one piece, because we're keeping this slip pocket as one. We don't need to do anything with our back piece because there's nothing going onto that. If you want to add a nameplate on at this point, you can. I think I'll add mine on here. Sure I've got it the right way up. I did that in a bag I made the other day. I put my nameplate in the other way around. I didn't realise until I was pretty much nearly finished. I was so annoyed with myself. So just make sure that's straight before I tighten it up properly and put some tape on the back. So there's our main panels done, and then we can move on to our bottom panels and our gussets. So moving on to the bottom panels and the gussets. So the pattern doesn't call for purse feet, but I'm going to install some just to show you how to do it, because it is very, very simple. So obviously, because the pattern doesn't call for it, there isn't any instructions as to where to place it, but because this is quite a small bottom panel, all I've done is I've just measured in 2 inches from each edge. So I've basically just lined up like a 2-inch corner and made a mark. So I'm just going to make a very, very small slit on each of those marks, and then your purse feet or bag bottoms will come with little prongs like this. Some are screw in, but basically you just put them in and screw at the bottom, so they go in very, like similar to a screw-in rivet. So you would just push them through. Obviously there's already decorative on the bottom of here. push the washer onto the back. I give them a little twist and then just flatten out the prongs. It really is that simple. And similar to all the other hardware, just cover over the prongs with some tape. So that's 4 purse feet added in, and that just gives the bottom of the bag some protection when you're popping it down, but it's not necessarily, if you don't have them, you don't have to put them in. That's the beauty of this bag. You literally don't need to use any hardware if you don't want to, or if you don't have it and you're just testing the waters with bag making and you literally have material and interfacing, then you can give this bag a try. But if you want to use a little bit of hardware, then you can add it in as well. It is a really lovely bag. So we need to add, or start to add, our foam. Now there's 2 ways that you can do this. You can baste the foam to the edges at 1/4 of an inch. The way that I do it is that I just use a little bit of spray glue. Now I did always used to baste my foam to my pieces, but to then cut the foam back out of my seam allowances, you've then got to unpick all the basting, which, you know, adds time, and I don't really like unpicking things. So now I just use a little bit of spray glue. There's loads of different ones on the market, that's just one that I just happen to have, or if I'm honest, I think I was just in the garage. So I'm then going to do exactly the same with the ones for my side panel. So I'm not using loads, I'm just using a little bit. I'm just lining it up. If your foam is slightly shorter or slightly smaller, it doesn't really matter, because you are going to be cutting it out of your seam allowances in order for your bag to sort of like look right. So exactly the same way as we did when we did our lining, we line up the short side pieces. Sorry, words seem to be very hard today. And we stitch them together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now, because I'm using vinyl, I'm going to actually run a second row of stitching just inside this row that I've just done. And then do exactly the same on the opposite side. And then I'm just going to cut this foam out of the seam allowances. I'm not going to cut my seam allowances back. And then I'm just going to open these seams and I'm going to top stitch down each side. Oh, this seam's just slipped as I was stitching it, so I'm going to have to unpick it back, which isn't great when you sew on vinyl, because obviously you don't want those holes, but it's on the bottom, so it isn't the end of the world. I could just take it back to where it slipped, and sort of over stitch, but I'd rather take it back to the start and there we go. Right. So start that again, sorry. So that's both those side seams top stitched down. So So if we find the centre of our gussets, like we did with the lining, and then get our front and back pieces. I'm going to attach our foam in the same way. So we'll just match our centres, so it's exactly the same way as how we did with our linings. Obviously it's a little bit more difficult because we're working with foam as well, so it's a little bit thicker. So you've just got to try and encourage it to do what you want it to do. And like previously with the lining, you can never have too many clips. So I'm going to sew round at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, and because I am sewing with vinyl, I'm going to do that second row stitching just behind the first row stitching within the seam allowance, just to give it that extra strength. then just going to go around and trim the foam out of the seam allowance as close to the stitching as possibly can. You're just going to do that on both sides. And then you're just going to attach your other lining piece in exactly the same way. But I'm just going to trim the excess of the seam allowances down a little bit. Again, I'm not going to take the first inch . Going to turn the bag through just to make sure that I've caught all my edges, that I haven't got any raw edges showing. And that I'm happy with all my seams. And I'm just making sure that I've caught in these edges of this slip pocket here. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty happy with that pattern matching too. Not that it was intentional. So I'm actually gonna pin my handles on while I've got it this way through, so I'm just going to decide which side I want to be facing out. So I want that side to be facing out. So you obviously want to make sure that there's no twists when you're attaching these handles, and you basically want to be lining the handles up with the outer edge of this seam. So exactly the same with your other one. And I'm just going to base them in place. So that's my handles just basted in place. I'll turn that back through. Them inside. So on our magnetic snaps, we want to be installing them on our lining pieces. We want to be installing them about 1 inch down. We've got the centre markings on our lining pieces, so if we mark 1 inch down and then mark our bits to cut, by putting them 1 inch down, that should give us enough for our seam allowance and for our top stitching, so that those magnetic snaps shouldn't catch, but that also the magnetic snaps really quite at the top, so it keeps the bag shut and obviously secure. So it kind of doesn't massively matter which way you install the clasps, as in, you know, which side is which, but I tend to like the zip pocket to be on the back of my bag, so I'm going to just install the male part on this side, and I'm just going to secure that with a little bit of Decaville Light. And a little bit of tape, and then I'm just going to do exactly the same on the opposite side. So from that centre mark, I'm going to mark 1 inch down, mark where my prongs need to go, just really carefully with your seam ripper, obviously not using too much force, because you don't want to obviously make those rips sort of too big.
checking you're in.
Yeah.
Right. Leave it over.
And that's your magnetic snaps installed on your lining pieces. So we're basically ready to put our lining together with our exterior. So like I said, I like the pocket part of my bag to be on the back side of my bag. So I'm going to put a pocket to the back and put that in, making sure my handles are inside and not twisted. And then I'm going to match up those side seams. Now because I pressed my my lining, my side seams are pressed flat, so that makes it a little bit easier to match them up. And then just need to go around and clip the top all the way around. And in theory they should match perfectly, because we made the top of the lining a ½ inch exactly the same as we made the exterior of the bag, and mine does match. Phew, that would have been embarrassing. So I'm gonna stitch round the top of the bag at a ½ inch seam allowance, and again I'm going to go around with 2 rows of stitching just for added strength. And just when you're going over where your handles are, I'm just going to move this out a bit. Sorry, I know my camera angle keeps changing. My camera's kept going on and off the whole time I've been filming this. My battery's gone, the camera's stopped a couple of times for a couple of reasons. There's been a few disturbances with people in the building a few times, so I'm aware that the camera angles kept changing. I'm so sorry. I need to maybe mark something on my floor so I know exactly where I'm putting my camera. So yeah, right, okay. When you're going over where the handles are, just go slow. This is where you would tend to break needles by going over too fast. Don't try to force the bag through. It'll go through if you just kind of let the machine take it through. Obviously it is quite thick because, you know, we've used foam and I'm using vinyl. Obviously if you've got a domestic machine and you're worried about whether it'll use vinyl or not, just use cotton and interface your cotton for your handles. That will work perfectly well. But if you are using vinyl and you're a little bit frightened of whether your machine will handle it, just go slow. It's not a race. I know a lot of times, you know, you see people on YouTube, especially people who've been sewing a lot of years and who have, you know, really quick machines, and you see them sewing really quickly and really proficiently, and it can be a little bit intimidating. Don't let it be. Just take your time. You know, I'm coming up to a handle here, so I'm just slowing down a little bit. And this is obviously why I'm going to go around twice, because I've got those extra thick seams where, you know, where those handles are, and I want to make sure that they're well secured. And if you find your stitching goes off a little bit, especially where it's a little bit thicker, your second row of stitching you can use to kind of neaten that up a little bit, you know, so it's not the end of the world. So I'm back round to where I started now. I realise you can't kind of really see the needle because of the bag, but I'm back round to where I started, and I'm just going to run another row of stitching just kind of inside, just like I say, for extra support and strength. So that's the top stitch round. Now I never trim the top of my bag, the seams, but what I will do is I will trim the foam back as much as I can, just to reduce the bulk for when I'm top stitching. But I do, as I say, I don't actually trim the seam of the top. I actually find that I get a bit of a flatter and a nicer top stitching if I actually leave the seam alone. So we're going to turn the bag through, and we're going to turn it through the opening in the lining. Now it's not much bigger than the lining in the pocket, but it is a little bit bigger. Now obviously with using foam, it does make the bag you know, a little bit harder to birth, so you've just got to take your time, not force it, because the last thing that you want to hear is a ripping sound. You know, that's never good. It is sometimes easier with bags that have like a box bottom, because you can leave like a bigger opening to pull it through. Obviously where it's a gusset, you've got to sort of sew around that rounded part, but it is easier to bringing it through the lining than it is the zipper pocket, as you can see. It has come through relatively easily, so I'm just gonna pop my hand through and push the corners of the bag out. And just check this top, make sure I haven't missed any bits. I'll just push the lining in. And then at this point, just using my fingers to just roll that lining round. You can really see sort of like the bag's starting to come together now. So I'm just going to use lots and lots and lots and lots of clips to keep the lining sort of tucked in so that I can top stitch. I think actually that magnetic snap's probably a little bit too high. Probably could have done with being a little bit lower. So actually probably if you're installing a magnetic snap, maybe it's a little touch lower, maybe it's using a 14mm magnetic snap probably would be a little bit better. But I'll make it work somehow. So I'm going to start my top stitch, and obviously I've got to make sure that I keep my straps on the underside of my foot. I'm going to do my top stitching a slightly different way to how I would normally do my top stitching. Normally I would top stitch from I would have the top of the bag facing up over, but obviously I'm top stitching from with the lining up over, and the reason being is because the magnetic snap's a little bit too close to the top. So I'm going to stitch it this way and kind of just see how it comes out. Hopefully it should be fine. Where I'm going over these straps, I'm just really taking my time and not forcing the bag through. I'm just letting the machine take the bag through. Obviously I'm keeping the needle in the down position so that as I manipulate the bag, it's not adjusting my stitching. One of the other reasons that I would normally always stitch with my exterior on the upside is because I don't want the feed dogs to affect the vinyl, which it sometimes can. You've got to be careful. So that's another reason that I'm being very careful not to try and force the bag through, because if I do that, the feed dogs would sort of rip the vinyl and really destroy it basically and tear it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm being very slow, very careful. No, I think I'm getting away with it. Great. So I just need to obviously clip the ends there on that top stitching. It has gone off ever so slightly at the top here where that magnetic snap is a little bit too close, but I've come out a little bit. So, but it's not the end of the world. These things happen. So to close up the lining, what I'm going to do is pull the lining through the hole that we have in the zipper pocket, and we'll be able to see where started and where we finished on the lining when we did that. And then I'm just going to trim the excess of that seam down, literally from where it was trimmed down before. And then we just need to close up the inside of the pocket. And because we have that little sort of lip that we created when we stitched that pocket together, it just folds in really nice and easily. So you can clip it, but I find just, you know, if you pull it really nice and taut, it just sort of sits. It sits nicely and it's easy to sew. need to push that lining inside, clip your magnetic snap, and there's the bag finished. So it's got an internal pocket, 2 slip pockets, and then a pocket at the front with a magnetic snap. So like I say, with the magnetic snap, I'd probably place a little bit lower, maybe it's an inch and a quarter, but it is just, you know, trial and error as to what you find works for you. Maybe it's a smaller 14mm magnetic snap would work just as well. So that's the bag all finished. So thank you for watching my tutorial today on the Ethel Tote. So sorry for the few little technical glitches with batteries running out, etc. I don't think it would be one of my tutorials though if there wasn't a few little technical glitches and a couple of things going wrong, because to be fair, that is just my life, that is just how things are for me. So I've said in a previous video that I want my channel to be real, and hopefully that's what it is. So I hope it's been helpful, and if there's anything that anybody feels that I've missed or haven't explained fully, please drop me a comment. I'm happy to try and explain in more depth, or message me on my Facebook page or my website. I'm happy to receive messages in that way as well. So thank you for watching. Like I say, I hope it's been helpful, I hope it's been useful. Thank you to all the new subscribers. I've had quite a lot of new subscribers lately, so it's lovely that people are coming and enjoying my videos. Hopefully camera angles and everything like that are okay and people can sort of see what I'm doing. Obviously it's quite new to me, still getting used to it, I'm still learning, and hopefully as my channel grows and as I get more used to filming and, you know, trying different camera angles out and trying new things out, you know, the tutorials and filming will get better and my tutorials will get better as well. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Have a lovely week. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to see my next video when it's released. I'll see you next time.